So let's take a look at the REST service that you might be working on in the upcoming sprint. So we're going to focus here between the interactions between the REST controller and the JPA repository. Let's see. If we expand that, we'll see that the REST controller, you might already have in the REST controller mappings to find all or find by ID that you might have implemented in a prior sprint. To those already existing mappings, we're going to add a couple more. We're going to add a post, put, and a delete. Right? Post for being able to create new instances, put for being able to update existing instances, and finally delete for being able to remove existing instances. Okay? Now for post, we're going to have the REST controller mapping to an executable function here that is going to use the repository that is going to call save on that repository to do an insert into a database. Instead, for the put, it's gonna parse out the ID of the record that is going to be modified. It'll have a JSON object in the body with the updates of the object. Is going to use the REST controller is going to use the JPA repository to find the record from the database. Once it has it in memory, it's going to make the changes based on the incoming object with the updates, and then it's going to save it back in the database. Right? Do an update into a database. Notice that in both cases, when we create a brand new record and when we update the record, we're both using save in both cases. Save, when there's no ID, when we don't know any ID or there is no ID, is interpreted as an insert into a database, whereas save, when there is already an existing ID of a record that already exists, it's interpreted as an update into a database, right? And we'll talk about that a little further. Whereas delete has no body, but it does have the ID of a record that already exists, and the controller just uses the out-of-the-box delete by ID function that is provided by the JPA repository and to remove that record that has that specific ID. Make sense? So that's what we're building. So it might look like something like this in your controller. For the post, right? For creating new records, here we have the mapping /API/ whatever your object model is. I'm using quotes. I took one of the more boring data models and leaving you some of the more exciting ones. Here's a create quote that basically is reading the JSON that we're sending from the client. It's parsing it from the string, a JSON string, and it's converting it into a instance quote in Java, right? And it'll map field by field. So ID to ID, title to title, description to description. Right? It'll create an instance of a Java object, right? And then it's using the repository to save this into the database, right? And do an insert into a database. Okay? So app request body parses the data from the JSON HTTP body that's coming from the client, and repository save will do an insert into a database. The update method, what it does is that, again, it's mapped to a put. Notice a put. Again, we're following good RESTful design practices, right? We have the /ID of the record that we're updating, and we are parsing that ID from the path and mapping it to a local ID variable, and then we're using that ID to find that object from the database, doing a select, using where the ID of that record is this ID, and we're retrieving that object here in a quote. We are updating whatever fields we need to update. In this case, we're updating the field job title. And once we've made any updates to the record, we can then save it back to a database, right? Using save. Now, save here is going to be an update as opposed to an insert because the quote, having been read from the database, has an ID, right? So it's mapped to an actual record in the database. Right? So here, the save doesn't update as opposed to an insert. And finally, we have delete quote. Again, map to delete mapping that passes the ID of the record that we want to remove. We parse it from the variable, from the path, and we map it to a local integer ID. and then we use the out-of-the-box delete by ID method on the repository to remove it from the database, and it's poof, it's gone.